Hey everybody, Travis Bowman here. I'm a fingerstyle guitar player and retro video game nerd. The Nintendo 64 just got a huge upgrade in the Brawler 64 Pro. This is a new controller from Retro Fighters, although the concept of a wireless controller on the Nintendo 64 is not exactly new, especially coming from Retro Fighters. We had the Brawler 64 that was released a few years ago, and this is basically an upgraded version of that. Now I'm going to go against the typical YouTuber formula and go ahead and say that I actually really do love this new controller from Retro Fighters. It's really freaking awesome, and yes, I do love it more than the original Brawler 64. Before we take a look at the specs and talk about the Brawler 64 Pro, it's probably pretty important that we spend some time talking about the original Brawler 64. Despite the fact that this is the newest controller from Retro Fighters, as of the making of this video, the original Brawler 64 is still for sale. So here's the original Brawler 64 right here. I actually really do love this controller, and in my opinion, this is the best controller that Retro Fighters has made up until this point. In my opinion, this is probably one of the best, if not the best, controller that Retro Fighters has ever made. We desperately needed this. Unlike some of the other controllers that they offer, that's really just a nice upgrade, this was actually kind of a needed thing. At least it was for me. Now, there's always going to be some opinions about the original N64 controller, about how people love it, people hate it, it's a weird design. We're going to be talking about that damn thing for the rest of our lives, I think, with that odd three-pronged design and weird layout. I myself have used that controller for several years, and I really didn't have any issues with it as a kid, nor did I have issues with it growing up. However, these days, my hands are just too freakishly big, man. And I've had this problem for a long time now. I cannot comfortably enjoy the original Nintendo 64 controller because my knuckle rubs against that left prong, and it's very uncomfortable, especially when you're really trying to get into an intense game on the Nintendo 64 that requires a lot of focus. It can be really distracting and honestly kind of painful. That might just be a me thing. I have giant monkey hands and I've grown to deal with it with other situations, but the N64 controller in particular is physically very difficult for me to enjoy these days. That's why I was very interested in the Brawler 64, and I've got to tell you that this controller is pretty much freaking perfect. I love it so much, in fact, that I purchased 4 separate Brawler 64 controllers just so all my friends can come over and we can enjoy some of that wonderful multiplayer on the Nintendo 64. So let's talk about the specs of the original Brawler 64. It's only for the Nintendo 64, so you can't use this specific controller on other devices. However, there is a Nintendo Switch Online edition of this controller that works with the Nintendo Switch. We're working with 2.4 gigahertz, and it comes with its own respected dongle that's just for the Nintendo 64, and you also have the option of using the controller pack with this dongle that plugs into your console, which is very nice. You've got about 30 feet of wireless range with this controller. This is obviously a modern iteration of the Nintendo 64 controller, so you've got dual Z triggers on the back. You've got some turbo functionality with this controller as well. This controller was released in January of 2021, and it comes at a $50 price tag with a bunch of different colors to choose from. Now, the color of these controllers released by Retro Fighters perfectly mimic the controllers that were released for the actual Nintendo 64 controller back in the day. So there's a lot of collectability there, which is something that is really, really nice when you buy from Retro Fighters. They really go all in on their packaging as well, as you can see in this unboxing. But also, check out some of these stickers, man. I usually don't really care about stickers, but I have to at least mention them in this video because I think they are really freaking cool, and I kind of want to put some of those on my harp guitar case. What I love about the Brawler 64, the original, mind you, is that it just works. It works really great. I've played a lot of Nintendo 64 games with this controller. The Dpad is pretty darn good. I like the central placement of the start button. C buttons are great. A and B button feel just right. And the stick is very, very good. And it feels very close to the actual Nintendo 64 controller as far as the directional inputs and everything. It doesn't feel like a knockoff controller. It feels like it's meant to be on this system. Now, some people have had some negative things to say about Retro Fighters in the past, and I will admit that their controllers haven't always been 100% perfect. In the early days of Retro Fighters, we did see some well, questionable things with some of their triggers and stuff like that, and they actually went back and remedied that with some other iterations of controllers, and I think their quality has increased so much since those original issues. And like I've stated previously, I've got 4 of these controllers in all sorts of different colors, and it's a really nice addition to my game room. When my friends want to come over, we don't have to worry about untangling wires for the N64 controller and worry about tripping over them when we want to go grab something to drink or go to the restroom or something like that. These are all wireless and they all connect pretty freaking seamlessly, and I've never had an issue where this controller just doesn't want to pair with the dongle, although there is one caveat to that we'll address here in just a little bit. In the meantime, let's jump into the specs of the Brawler 64 Pro. This time you can use this on your Nintendo 64 with the included matching dongle, just like the one before. You can also use this on your Switch 1 and 2, as well as your PC, thanks to the dedicated USB dongle that we're getting this time. We've got 2.4 gigahertz just like before on the Nintendo 64, as well as through the USB adapter. We have Hall effect sticks this time that match the full range of the Nintendo 64, which is great. And for the first time with this controller, we're also seeing the inclusion of some really nice button macros. You can view the button combinations for those macros in the included manual that you'll get with this controller, but basically you can adjust the vibration intensity, you can swap your trigger and shoulder button mappings if you want to, you can turn all of the LEDs on or off, and you've also got some back button programming that you can do, and those back buttons on the back of this controller are lockable. So you've got a switch on the back so you can lock those back buttons. That way you're not accidentally pressing them all the time if you're somebody like me who doesn't really care about those mappable back buttons. You don't want to have to be pressing them knowing that they're just not doing anything. And also for the first time, we have a really nice micro switch D-pad. This controller has an 1000 hertz polling rate. We've got some magnetic faceplates that you can interchange depending on how many controllers that you do have in the Brawler 64 Pro line. This is expected to release sometime in August of 2026. And you've got a $70 price tag on this guy. Let me just say that the overall design of this controller compared to the original is actually really, really nice. Now, I will say that at first glance, this controller didn't look as good as I thought it was going to be compared to this one, because I do like the prongs and how kind of, long that they are and everything. This is a very comfortable controller to hold, and looking at it, it might not look that way at first, but I promise you, it is. This is actually a very comfortable controller to fit in your hands. My pinkies kind of want to hang off just a little bit, but that's really the only complaint that I have as far as being comfortable is concerned. You've got your ZL and ZR trigger as well as your L and R trigger, and that's the big difference here, is that this was kind of designed with the Switch in mind, not just the Nintendo 64, and you can see that with the button placement. You've got the minus button and the plus button, which of course is red to let you know that, hey, on the N64, that's your start button right there. You've got your home buttons as well as your share button, or whatever that's called on your Nintendo Switch. Other than that, this is pretty much exactly the same thing that we've seen before, but we can't forget about the stuff that's on the back of this controller now. You've got these lockable switches, so that way you can lock these buttons that they've named PR and PL, as well as your input switch right there. So you might want to know how to go between your X input and D input on your PC as well as your Switch, and you can read all about that stuff in the manual. But I gotta say that the stick on this controller feels really, really nice. I've never had any issues whatsoever with playing any game on the Nintendo 64, and I've played quite a few with this controller since I got it in the mail. My number one game to play on the Nintendo 64 when testing a controller is, believe it or not, Castlevania. I know a lot of people have some negative things to say about that game, but I don't care. That game is one of my favorite games of all time, man. And it's a platformer. It's a very challenging platformer on the Nintendo 64, so what better game to test with this controller than a game like that? If we're really getting into the nitty-gritty between these two controllers as far as the buttons are concerned, I'm noticing that on the Pro version the buttons are a little more rounded, and on the original version they're kind of really sharp and flat, and that goes for the C buttons as well as your A and B buttons there. One thing that I actually do miss on this controller, just because I've gotten so used to it, I mean, I've been using this controller since 2021 and now we're in 2026, but one thing that I've gotten really, really used to is having the start button be in the center of the controller, and it's such a nice placement. You can reach that with your thumb very, very easily while you're playing games, and it's freaking awesome, and I really do miss that. However, this controller has the start button up in the top right like you would see on any other modern controller design, and I feel like they really could have put a larger start button right there, but I understand the reasoning behind not doing that, and it's just because you want to accommodate this thing for the Switch and the Switch 2 as well. I had zero problems with the D-pad on the original controller here, but I'll be the first to admit that I didn't use it a lot. There's not a lot of games on the Nintendo 64 that require you to use the D-pad over the stick. The one that comes to mind is Kirby 64 The Crystal Shards, and I had no issues using this D-pad, and I actually kind of liked it. On the other hand, though, what an upgrade on that D-pad, man. This is like almost perfectly mimicking a Super Nintendo D-pad, and you've got these lovely micro switches. And it's so satisfying. It's weird to use this on the Nintendo 64, but at the same time it feels perfectly natural, man. I really, really like the D-pad on this controller a lot. Now going back to the original for just a moment, we've got the stick right here and it's got kind of a rubber top, which is totally fine. I've never had any issues with it personally. It's just kind of a flat rubber top. There's nothing really to write home about. However, we got to talk about my buddy Jonathan. I feel like in every controller review I have to mention my buddy Jonathan because he's the guy that comes over to play these multiplayer games with me most of the time. This controller that I'm holding right here has been designated as the Jonathan controller, and there's a reason for that. I love the guy to death. He's been my best friend since we were, in first grade, but the dude sweats battery acid. And it's gross, I love him, but he's just one of those guys that gets really intense and gets into the game and his hands sweat rivers out of his pores, man. It's like nothing I've ever seen before. And I will say that this controller in particular has been through it as a result. Now I'm talking about this mushroom top on this stick right here. He sweat so freaking much that he actually melted it off of the stick itself, and we had to super glue it back on, which was really kind of strange, but it worked. I mean, it's held up ever since, and he's been using this controller. I will always hand him this controller when we're playing something on the Nintendo 64 like Mario Tennis. That's one of our go-to party games whenever I get my buds together. We sit down and we grind through some Mario Tennis, and it's a great time. But that being said, this is his controller only, and nobody else is allowed to touch it. And he's not allowed to touch any other controller but this one. One other negative about this controller is that once you have all of your receivers plugged into your N64, I have noticed sometimes that these controllers get mismatched a little bit. Depending on who presses their start button first, this one might be in controller port 2, but if you press that start button first, sometimes it wants to connect to the dongle that doesn't match, meaning that every dongle has its respected color based on its controller that it belongs to. But sometimes with these controllers they get mixed up a little bit, and that can be a little confusing. That being said, it's only happened a few times since I've owned these controllers, and fixing it is a very easy issue. Just get up and go reset the console and then start over, and it's no big deal at all. Other than this controller not 100% pairing with each respected dongle 100% of the time, and the fact that the stick rubbed off due to my friend's battery acid sweat coming out of his hands, I have nothing negative to say about this controller whatsoever. It is my favorite Retro Fighters controller until now. It's pretty obvious why. You've got a much better D-pad, the buttons feel a lot nicer, and you've also got a GameCube looking stick here, which I forgot to mention earlier. This is very similar to the original GameCube stick as far as the design and the feel of it, but that being said, you do have that hexagonal whatever sort of layout with the stick, and it does match the Nintendo 64 stick fairly well. I have to say that I have no issues cutting corners, and I'm talking about in the game, actually, moving around with your corners. It's really, really seamless. I've tested out Super Mario 64. I've tested out Castlevania and Hybrid Heaven, Mario Tennis, and I was able to play through Mario Tennis and actually do a really good job like I normally would. I'm really good at that game. What can I say? I've played it all my life and I freaking love it. One other interesting thing about this controller is the fact that you've got faceplates here. This right here can be removed, which is very strange. You've got some indentations on the plastic on either side of the handles, and you can remove that first layer of plastic and then remove the faceplates, and then if you got another controller with a different color, you could mix and match those if you so desired. We can file this under completely unnecessary, but some people might really like that. If you're into collecting like I am, then you might find some value in that. It might be cool to get the red controller and swap the faceplate with the green version and vice versa. So there's a lot of room for, personalization with these controllers, which they didn't have to do, but I'm really glad that they did. Yes, it's absolutely unnecessary and it's just a cosmetic thing, an aesthetic thing, but I think it's really cool. Thus far, I've had absolutely zero issues with this controller. The battery life is great. Much like the original Brawler 64, which I forgot to mention earlier, it has an auto sleep function. So if you're doing stuff around the house and you sit down and play a game and you go to the bathroom or something, this controller will fall asleep after a few minutes of inactivity all you have to do is just press a couple of buttons, just say, hey, it's time to wake up, and then boom, you're right back into the game, which is a really nice feature, super underrated feature that I really do enjoy with a controller like this. If I had to pick a gripe about this particular controller, I would have to say that the triggers on the back, not the bumpers, but the actual triggers, they feel just fine. They feel great. I've had no issues ever using them, and the inputs always register every single time, but I am a little concerned about the plastic here because it is very thin. And what do you do when you're done playing a game? You take your controller and you plop it down on a desk that's probably made of hard wood. And what do you do when you want to play the game again? You reach for the controller and you grab it. But you hear that? Scraping against my skin right there. Imagine that, but on like a harder surface. And I am a little worried about that. They do feel a little flimsy on the edges right here. The plastic is very thin. So I do worry about possibly having a situation where these might break a little bit, and we have seen that in Retro Fighters in the past with the original Dreamcast controller. I did a video all about that. Their original triggers on that wired Dreamcast controller were just not the best. They were very low quality plastic, and that controller was just such a shame because it was a great idea and it was much needed in the Dreamcast community. However, much like Retro Fighters is known to do, they take their mistakes and they rectify them, and we've seen that in the wireless iteration of that Dreamcast controller. All in all, I really do love this controller, and this is definitely going to be replacing my original Brawler 64 controller when I want to play Nintendo 64 games, which really is kind of a pain in the ass because now I want to replace all of them with this one just because it's so freaking great. And that brings me to the price point. This is like $20 extra compared to the original, which some people might gripe about, but some people might be okay with. I think for the upgrades that you receive with this controller, the price is justified. It's super nice having that micro switch D-pad and having that new stick. The controller does feel a little heavier also compared to the original. It feels a lot heavier. It's probably twice as heavy, which you might think is a negative thing, but I actually do like it. It is a little bit more robust, and I can really feel the weight in my hands. If I threw it at somebody, it would probably hurt very badly. And I probably should have mentioned this at the beginning of the video, but I didn't even bother testing this out on my PC or the Nintendo Switch or Switch 2 for that matter. I was mainly interested in this on the Nintendo 64. The reason is because I don't have any interest in playing Nintendo 64 games, or games that only use one stick for that matter, on any of those platforms. The option is there, which is nice. I imagine this would pair really nicely with an N64 emulator on your PC, and I'm sure that it would pair very nicely with your Nintendo Switch Online service using the N64 games on that service. But I myself am not interested in digital gaming, and I definitely don't want to be locked to a subscription fee just to play a couple of games that I really enjoyed from my childhood, but maybe that's just me. You know, I've tested out a ton of wireless controllers that are meant for retro consoles, and this is probably one of my favorite ones. It's definitely in my top 3. I've really enjoyed using this controller. It's really nice. It feels great in the hands. All the buttons feel great. I love the connectivity, and I love the fact that if I wanted to use this on my PC, I totally could, even though I probably never will. This is definitely going to be my #1 Nintendo 64 controller from here on out. Well, I'd love to know what you guys think about the Brawler 64 Pro from Retro Fighters. Have you ever used a Retro Fighters controller before, and what are your experiences with that brand? Do you still own the original Brawler 64 from Retro Fighters? And what's the first Nintendo 64 game you can see yourself playing using the Brawler 64 Pro? Let me know the answers to all those questions in the comments section below. Be sure to check the description of this video for more retro controller reviews, as well as a ton of videos all about different peripherals for your Sega Saturn and your Sega Dreamcast, as well as your Nintendo GameCube. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Big thanks to Retro Fighters for being a pal and sending me this controller for review. I really appreciate those guys. You can find the link to purchase your own Brawler 64 controller in the description below. Thank you so much for subscribing. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys at the very next video. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.